Hello and welcome to another video and podcast from fantasyfootballscout.co.uk. My name is David and of course I am joined by Mark, the FPL General, for another episode of General's Orders. The international break is winding to a close. The FPL community could certainly do with some football that means something for our FPL teams coming back, and we've got that within the next few days, haven't we, Mark? It must be nice to see the international break winding down.
Yeah, good to be back, David. Hope your break is going well. It's always nice just to get over that weekend of no games. Once you get to Monday, Tuesday, you feel like it's getting closer. We have FPL back. The pain will be back soon. You very quickly forget how frustrating FPL is during a break. You crave it. And as we often see, I think the game week after the last international break was a frustrating one. There can be quite odd game week sometimes, but I think when you look at the fixtures coming up in Gameweek 9, hopefully it'll actually be quite a high-scoring game week and it will be FPL back with a bang.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I know what you mean, though. International break, returning game weeks. It's almost like because the players have all gone off and gone their separate ways for a little bit, some of the rhythms that teams had got themselves into get knocked a little bit out of kilter, and then you sort of end up with a new sort of, set of trends emerging over the next couple of weeks. It's why I personally don't like to wildcard during an international break. I can see the appeal, I can see it, but I feel like I've just been burnt too many times. So I'm kind of like the opposite. In many ways, international breaks. I wish it could continue forever because it gives me plenty of opportunity to create content and without having to update all of the slides. The best thing, if you're watching us on YouTube, is this is exactly the same screens I used last week because my rank hasn't changed and neither has Mark. So there's definitely a lot of advantages in international break that are going to go away, sadly, when the football comes back. I mean, of course, there has been football on, there has been matches on, there's been some important matches for England, and of course for yourself up there in Scotland. There's been this injury to Andrew Robertson, for example, but at the same time, the actual football itself, forget the injury to Andrew Robertson, it's actually going quite well for you guys north of the border, isn't it?
Yeah, it's funny. I've been in Scotland for 8 years now, and I'm almost more of a Scottish fan than an Irish fan at the moment. It's easy to say that when Ireland are so poor at the moment. I actually sat down on Friday night, given the lack of FPL action. I found myself sitting down to watch Ireland playing at home. You're used to poor performances, but bit of optimism, sat down and watched us lose 2-0 at home and very quickly switched it off again. But do you know what? It was quite interesting. I didn't even really see the team sheets before the game, and obviously the Robertson injury news happened a couple of days before that Ireland game. And it just happened to be that Mr. Shimakas was playing for Greece against Ireland. And I was already thinking about him as a potential option for my team. And then he pops up with a lovely cross during the Greece-Ireland game for Giacomakis to score a great header. So picked up an assist just to kind of tempt me into him as a possible transfer for Game Week 9. So maybe that's a sign. I didn't even think about whether he'd be playing or not. Kind of forgot he even did play for Greece. Maybe the stars are aligning, and I was meant to see that assist. And maybe I should bring him in because I do have 0.8 in the bank, and I've got Bayer and Gusto as my fourth and fifth defender. So I could sell Gusto possibly for a Shimakas for a couple of weeks. Obviously, I'll just wait and see what Klopp says about the Robertson injury. If it is going to be a couple of weeks, even if it was 3 or 4 weeks, I would probably take the plunge. I think at 4.4, I think is Shimakas costs. I've got my team on paper. I've got Gabriel this week away to Chelsea, which is probably fine. But I would probably rather have Shimakas in there, maybe just bench Gabriel for that Chelsea fixture. So if I do end up making a transfer this week, there's a good chance it could be the backup Liverpool defender. So that's just something I'm going to keep an eye on throughout the week.
Yeah, I hadn't actually realised that the stars had aligned in such a way, and watching Greece, it was perhaps a sign from the Delphic Oracle herself that he could be worth having. I mean, yeah, it's a good price. Liverpool's fixtures are looking good. We're all very interested in Salah, and perhaps if we can work out who's the most likely starter outside of him in the attack. There's been lots of discussion around Liverpool and their fixtures. It definitely looks like an opportunity. And yeah, you mentioned we will need to hear from Klopp before we know a little bit more. We were just looking before we came on what the latest was on Robertson, and we're in that limbo where unfortunately, his manager is Steve Clarke, who famously is not particularly he doesn't say much in press conferences anyway. And then, of course, he hasn't come back to Liverpool yet. He may well have done, but he hasn't come back to Liverpool with enough time for us to have a Klopp press conference where we get more detail on this injury. And so the official line from the Scotland camp and from their manager is Liverpool will deal with it. So thank you very much, Steve. And so it means that for now, we can assume a few weeks probably, but whether or not it's 2 weeks or 12 weeks, we just have no idea. And that really will be the determining factor over whether or not there's value for Shimmercast. Because I think best case scenario is, this is from a Shimmercast perspective, of course, because of course best wishes to Andrew Robertson, is that you get him for maybe 6 to 8 weeks, because then, if towards the end of that period he's obviously kind of useless again because Robertson's back, at least you've got some value on over that run. Worst case scenario is it's only 2 weeks, you get Shimmercast, and then you're stuck with a 4.4 million defender who's not playing, who you may have to leave rotting on your bench if you have bigger issues to solve. So we do really need to see what Klopp has to say, don't we, with this one?
Yeah, and again, I've got the fixture ticker in front of me here on the Scout website. It's even if it's, ideally, if we could get 4 games out of Shimmercast, 3 home games in 4, Everton, Forest, Luton away, and then Brentford at home before they play Man City in Game Week 13. If we could get those 4 games, that would be ideal. Obviously, I've got a wild card still in my pocket as well, so it's probably easier to get a Shimmercast if you do have that, because at least at some point you're going to have a bit of a clear out, and Shimmercast will be deadwood whenever Robertson is back. So it's an interesting one, and just maybe a bit of an opportunity more so for the wildcarders than others.
Yeah, absolutely. We've mentioned your team, and I've actually had that on the screen for the last few moments. Your bus team as it currently stands. We talked about it a little bit last week, but for those of you who weren't able to watch last week, perhaps you maybe took the international break off. Here is Mark's team on the screen now. So it's Turner in goal, Trippier, Gabriel, Cash as the back 3, Son, Maddison, Fernandes, Bowen as the midfield 4, Alvarez, Haaland, captain, Watkins up front, and then Johnston, Bayer, Gusto and Nakamba on the bench. You've kind of already alluded to some of your thoughts in relation perhaps to Gabriel and Gusto and Bayer there, but anything else changed in your mind? Sometimes in the international break it's not necessarily a footballing incident that changes your mind, it's just that mulling over of some decisions sometimes helps crystallise a few things, doesn't it? So anything changed in the last week?
I've actually I'm not always able to do it, but I've actually been able to switch off quite a bit during this international break, and it helps. I think this might be the first international break for a very long time where there's no yellow flags. I know there's still time for some of them to appear. There's a few more games to go midweek, but it's all looking good so far for Game Week 9. No flags. Fixtures are good. So I think 9 of 11 are at home. It's just Gabriel away to Chelsea and Bruno away to Sheffield United, who are away. Good fixtures. Overall, I think there's a good chance I might end up rolling my transfer. So yeah, all's looking rosy at the moment, and hopefully no issues, especially just with players like Alvarez playing in South America, I think on Wednesday, coming back late possibly. So just got to monitor those press conferences again Thursday and Friday, but no transfers made. Everything's looking fine. And hopefully might be able to at least have the option of rolling a transfer.
Yeah, I'd quite like to do the same thing, especially after an international break as well. When things change a lot, or if they change a lot going into Game Week 9, I want 2 free transfers to Game Week 10. I am a little bit more a slave to the flags, though. So I still have a Stupinan on my bench, who's probably going to still miss Game Week 9 and maybe 10. So I'm really working with, at most, 14 players, probably. One of whom also is Sven Botman, who still has an orange flag. Now, they talked about him maybe coming back for Game Week 9, so I'm really quite interested in that one, because if I don't have Botman, then I would have to start Anderson away at Newcastle, which I don't like the idea of, because Anderson has been doing really well so far this season, but I do think that even though they've defended well, the chance of a clean sheet against Newcastle is quite slim in my opinion. So, but the rest of the team I'm quite happy with. It's just I might have to make a transfer to be able to deploy an 11 I'm happy with, because I just feel like starting Anderson kind of feels like kind of shorthanded, going shorthanded. I've got Flecken and Turner, and at the moment I've actually got Flecken starting, but I'm increasingly coming around to the idea of it being Turner instead. Van de Ven, the lucky man himself, is still in the team, obviously at home against Fulham. Cash at home to West Ham. Maddison and Burmo, Diaby, Salah, Son as a midfield 5. I think I said last week, Burmo definitely deserves at least one more chance against Burnley, and if that goes wrong, then he's gone. And then Alvarez and Haaland. So yeah, going to be interested in those press conferences for Alvarez as well. So my team's a little bit more taped together than yours, but there's still a possibility I can roll if Botman is declared fit. So yeah, that's kind of my thinking there. But it's great, isn't it? So many players at home, so it means that most of my team is fine. It's just in that one area.
Yeah, if he's a good week, I definitely agree on the Mbumo. One more week, you got to play the fixture. Burnley have been shipping plenty of goals, haven't been great so far. None of the promoted teams have been great. So, and again, I was looking. I usually during an international break, especially when we get to this stage of the season, 8 game weeks worth of information. I spent a lot of time over the last week or so looking at some of the numbers in the members area, and it just kind of reinforced to me that Mbumo's still, I think, a good pick, even though he's 5 blanks and 6. He's right up there for a lot of the metrics, the expected numbers and stuff like that. So I would definitely give him the Burnley game and then maybe just reassess it after that, because I'm just again looking at it. It does get a little bit trickier for Brentford, Chelsea, West Ham, Liverpool, Arsenal in the 4 after that. So I think a lot of people will keep Mbumo this week, hopefully get a 10-pointer and then take those points and run somewhere else for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'm sort of looking at West Ham, to be honest. There's a few mid-priced midfielders that are kind of, on either on everyone's shopping list or they've already bought them. And I feel a little bit behind on West Ham. But yeah, the timing of a transfer is very important. So yeah, as I said, very happy to give him the Burnley game. There can't be many of us left, still with him. But I think sometimes when you hold on for a little while and other people go elsewhere, sometimes you actually end up with a little bit of a green arrow in that particular player's. When you look at live FPL, you can see what that player achieves for you. If he gets a goal this week, I think he individually will put me up a few places, which will be quite nice.
Again, they're my favorite kind of weeks. If you can get a goal or something out of Mbumo, like you said, there's a lot of people have already got off that train and shown a little bit more patience, or just almost been forced sometimes to keep players because of other issues. That's where some of the biggest rewards come in FPL. If you're one of the last few people to have them before selling them, maybe the week after, a 10-pointer would be absolutely huge from Mbumo this week, given his ownership and stuff like that. So yeah, I'll be rooting for him to do well for you, but when I don't have him, I'm not really going to be rooting for him, am I?
Well, it's nice of you to at least attempt to be cordial about it, so I appreciate that.
I tried to be nice and then I just backtracked.
Yeah, well, that's how it goes. That's how it goes in content creation. You want everyone to do well, but secretly you're like, I don't know that guy, so I really hope he doesn't do well. Got to put a little asterisk.
Penalty miss will do me.
Oh no! Oh dear. Well, you'll be able to gloat about it next week if that's what happens.
I can already see people clipping this 20-second segment, and it's going to be gold next week.
Oh, it's going to be General's Orders Civil War. Oh no, they've fallen out. Oh dear, bit of international break beef for you. Right, well, with that out of the way, let's move on to the first of our orders for this game week. We didn't have our orders last week because we thought let's focus them on this episode when we've got more of an idea of what the different factors are at play. You will be unsurprised to hear or see, depending on where you're accessing this content, that Erling Haaland is very much the subject of order number 1.
Yeah, order number 1 for Gameweek 9 is keep Erling Haaland. I found it very interesting over the last week or two. A player that everybody just automatically selected in Gameweek 1 has actually left quite a few teams, and people are still considering maybe losing him if they're wildcard in Gameweek 9 or Gameweek 10. Not necessarily wildcards, people are maybe just selling them as well. But I feel like it was a viable play, but I think that viable play was last week when Haaland had Arsenal, and a lot of people are losing him to get Salah or to accommodate Salah, and Salah had Brighton last week. So I feel like Game Week 8 was an okay time to make the switch. But on the flip side, this week, when Haaland himself has Brighton at home, and he's also got Bournemouth at home in the next 3 fixtures, 2 very plum home ties, very good for captaincy. I think if you have Haaland at this stage, then you keep him, and you probably captain him against Brighton as well. So again, looking at those numbers last week, Brighton conceding a lot of goals, conceding a lot of chances, just not a very good defensive side. A brilliant team, but you always fancy the opposition to score goals against them. So again, and if you're wildcarding this week, I would find it extremely difficult not to have Haaland when he's got Brighton at home. So if you really want Salah and you're wildcarding to get Salah, if it's this week, I'd probably be trying to fit both of them in, Salah and Haaland, which is very, very tricky. But yeah, order number 1 is keep Erling Haaland, and I'm pretty sure he's going to be my captain this week and probably game week 11 as well.
It's all about timing with these things, because you're right. The last 2 games especially, it has been viable to go with that Haaland. And the key thing is, and we didn't actually mention this last week, but certainly we're both aware of it, and we've noticed it, is Rodri wasn't there for those games. And we knew that they were going to be worse without him. But I think the whole footballing community was probably a little bit surprised by just how much worse they were without him. It's weird how dependent they seem to be on having him in the middle, which does make some sense when you think of the way they play their football. With that 3-2-4-1, you've got 2 groups of 5 that are trying to interact with each other. So you've got the reason why Pep plays the 3 and the 2 defensively so close together is they can look after the ball in a tight-knit group, move it forward and get it to the other set of 5 players. and it's almost basically bottlenecked through Rodri. It's more effective when it goes through Rodri and Stones, because then it's bottlenecked through two players instead of one. But that conduit for the team missing, and that had a massive impact on some of their stats. So if you've not had a chance to already check out the video that I did a few days ago, which goes into this particular Haaland issue in like really granular levels of detail, go check it out. But the long short of it is, I looked at Man City with and without Rodri, and everything's down. Possession, shots, chances created, passes in the final third. Just absolutely everything was down across those two matches, which maybe you might expect because Arsenal have defended quite well the last few games. But bearing in mind that one of those games was against Wolves, the drop-off shouldn't have been as big as it was. And, of course, the glaring factor is Rodri. The crazy thing is Haaland's had one shot in the last two matches. And so that has made people go, okay. But when you look in the first 6 game weeks, he was top of the league for shots in the box, top of the league for big chances, top of the league for shots on target. So that second set of stats there, or rather first set, from the first data set, game weeks 1 to 6, shows that when Rodri's in the team and that team is getting the ball to where they need it to go, they are creating just an innumerable number of chances for Haaland. He's miles ahead of everybody. I mean, even when you look at the season as a whole, to go game weeks 1 to 8, even with him only having one shot in the last 2, he's still like 6 or 7 shots ahead of anyone else for shots in the box. He's like 6 or 7 big chances ahead of anyone else for big chances, things like that. It is big, and the fixtures are great. So it might feel good. If you're sat there without Haaland right now, it will feel good in a hindsight kind of... Not a hindsight kind of way. I'm not suggesting that it's only a correct decision in hindsight. What I mean is like you can be happy with the progress you've made, but I would be nervous about what's coming next because it's going to shift. Rodri's coming back. Fixtures are getting better. So yeah, I'm with you completely. I've still got him. I've got Salah as well. And it makes me feel quite happy, especially for captaincy options.
Yeah, and again, I think the FPL community, a lot of us are probably guilty of kind of quickly building narratives around this kind of thing. But I think everyone's spot on with the Rodri thing. If you take an absolutely fantastic player out of a team, even though Man City are so good, you take arguably the key cog, as you mentioned, out of it. He's the engine room. He makes everything tick. Transition from defense to attack and all that kind of stuff. It's going to have an impact. And then you throw in the fact that they played against a very good Arsenal team. It's understandable why a lot of people didn't captain Erling Haaland in the week against Arsenal. And the Salah captains were rewarded. The Son captains were probably slightly unlucky with the red card and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm glad Rodri's back. I'm glad the Arsenal fixture's out of the way. And I'm now hopeful that as someone who's backing Haaland completely, that I will be rewarded over those who maybe went a different path for a couple of weeks. And I know the people who sold him, they know they still expect him to do well. They're just hoping that their team matches him or maybe slightly outscores him over the next couple of weeks. Something interesting I actually seen on Twitter this morning. It was from a Twitter account at RobTFPL. It was about the season-long Premier League goal projections after each game week. So this is all to do with kind of spread betting markets and stuff like that, which is obviously a good indicator of what will happen. And I think what they were saying was before the season, going into the season, Haaland was projected to score 27 goals. And then after 4 game weeks, that had gone up from 27 goals to 34. And even after the last couple of game weeks where he's only had one shot, that hasn't changed. He's now, I think after game week 7, he was projected to score 35 goals and has now dropped just 1 to 34. So he's still projected to score 34 goals this season. I think it was 36 in the league last year off the top of my head. So yeah. I was quite encouraged to see those numbers this morning. Again, it's that little bit of confirmation bias that I needed just to be confident with the armband and not read too much into the last 2 games.
Well, the underlying numbers that actually that I had on the screen here actually track really well with that kind of projection, because how he's comparing to last season in some metrics is better, even with those last 2 matches. So last season he had 4 shots per 90. This season it's 4.07. So I mean it's still basically the same, but the point is he's still as persistent. Shots on target per 90 has gone up from 1.95 from last season to 2.04. Penalty area shots per 90 has gone up from 3.74 per 90 to 4.07, for example. Weirdly enough, his creativity has gone up too. And actually the creativity is where we see the biggest rise for him. So he's gone from 0.7 chances created per 90 last season to 1.27 per 90 this season. And then therefore his expected goal involvement has just crept up a little bit from 1.03 to 1.07. Some of those are very, very small rises, but the point is they're still in the same ballpark. So across the whole course of the campaign, he is probably going to do quite well. But it's interesting that the biggest rise is in his creativity, so we might see some assists. I mean, it probably helps he's playing with Alvarez, who, whilst not being deployed as a striker, kind of is like the second striker. So we're kind of like halfway to a strike duo in the vein of Shearer and Sutton, sort of. So that does kind of help him. Have been a couple of times where he just squares the ball and there's Alvarez. So his points potential is still massive, isn't it?
Absolutely. And again, just on this little graphic, while I've got it here handy, so Haaland projected at the moment to score 34 league goals. Mohamed Salah projected to score 19. Big difference between 19 and 34, but obviously Salah is very creative, so you're hoping to get a lot of assists in there as well. I think one of the biggest changes since before the season started from these spread betting markets is Heung-min Son was projected to score 14 league goals. Now it's up to 18. So Haaland, Salah, and Son are very much in the top three, and so it's no surprise that we're talking about all those guys for captaincy when they've got good fixtures. So always nice to see some different kind of inputs in terms of numbers and stats and stuff like that just to throw out there. So yeah, I'm very much captain Haaland against Brighton, captain him in 11 against Bournemouth, and I'm not against captain him in Game Week 10 either against Manchester United, but we'll probably talk about a few other options shortly.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we've got a couple of other orders to come which do revolve around the captaincy. But last week we didn't go into our usual sort of sideshows, which include Dad's Army and Sonny Soldiers, so we thought that we would do that now. Some of you may have noticed on Twitter that I actually was with my dad last weekend. Not last weekend, the weekend before, the most recent deadline. So I actually managed to get live scenes of him picking his team in his railway room. I don't think I've mentioned this before, but he has a model railway room because he's a man who's worked on the railways all his life. So he's got and so he sat there in his little model railway room picking his team, and he'd been doing some really detailed model work. So he had one of those like. Light strapped to his head, which kind of made it look like he was using it to help him pick his FPL team. And it seemed to go down quite well. Some people even actually now want him to have his own show. I know you particularly enjoyed the picture, Mark.
Yeah, honestly, I've been on FPL Twitter for 8 or 9 years, and it was right up there as one of my favorite ever FPL images because it just encapsulated so much about the game. You know, not necessarily that he was using all those various tools and gadgets that were all round about him, but that's the way it looked. It looked like he put an insane amount of effort and time into his FPL team, but as we know, he doesn't because he ends up with players like Tim Ream in his team. So intrigued to see how he's getting on and what his latest transfers are.
Well, so he had one transfer for Game Week 8, I don't know how successful it was, to be honest. The main thing for him was that I feel really bad for him for Game Week 8 because he benched one of his players who's been doing really well this season, which is of course Ben White. He put him down as the third sub. He's very guilty. You know, when we talk about what sort of the more casual managers do, and inverted commas, what they do sometimes is a little bit just think it through. Like, why not put him first on your bench? He put him right down to the bottom of the bench, so he got 9 points, and he was, I think, his highest scoring player in his whole team, despite not actually starting. So just the 36 points from this week, which actually probably is music to your ears, Mark, because he's being rewarded for his skill level and his input here. So he is down. It's a big red arrow for him. He's down to 2.9 million. His transfer was to sell Ramsdale. Which actually made sense, but again, like Arsenal kept a clean sheet in the end. But yeah, he signed Johnston, which actually was a good transfer. Sorry, I've got my transfers mixed up. I implied that he'd had a bad transfer. That was a good transfer, so well done to him for that. But yeah, 2.9 million now. So yeah, you're very much soaring past him now, Mark. Don't worry. At the start of the season, it was a bit tight, but you're now 327k. He's 2.9 million. That's where you probably both deserve to be.
Yeah, order has been restored. Thankfully, it was. A couple of dodgy weeks there where he was making dodgy transfers and they were coming off. So it's good to see that all those hours in the railway room making decisions is not paying off now.
Very kind of you to say. One thing, just a little update. He's not bothered about his overall rank, but he does want to win his Church League this year. He is currently second in that one, so he's about 25 points off top spot. Definitely, he's still in the title race there. As I've said before, it just goes to show you what the skill level is in that church, that he can be as high as second out of about 12 people. But yeah, I'm rooting for your dad. Come on, man, you can do it. we'll see what happens in game week 9. So yeah, there we are. Dad's Army for game week 9 is going to be an interesting one. He's got someone to topple on top of that league. Now, whether or not he's able to do that with his captaincy choices, because he does make some odd ones sometimes, might actually be good for him to actually watch order number 2, because captaincy is the order of the week for many people. Lots of options in the next few weeks. Saka, Salah, Haaland, and Son. Actually, I've said that the wrong way around. Saka, Salah, Son, and Haaland, or Shh, as I'm calling it, are all kind of in the conversation. Lots of opportunities next couple of weeks. So yeah, take us through the second order, Mark. What's your view on the captaincy for now? Game week's coming up.
Yeah, so order number 2 for the viewers, listeners, and for myself also is to be flexible with the captaincy, because I went into the season with a very simple approach: auto captain Haaland until there's rotation or injury concerns. But one of my other bullet points every season is always everything's flexible. Nothing is ever set in stone, and it's very important to be flexible as an FPL manager. So I feel like I got lucky in game week 8. I captained Haaland against Arsenal. I had the option of captain and Heung-min Son, and I didn't do it. And thankfully he blanked, and I didn't have Salah. And I'm very much a fixtures-based manager. And if I'm a fixture-based manager, I've been reflecting on the Game Week 8 captaincy decision. I'm thinking, why did I captain Haaland against a very good Arsenal team when I could have captained Heung-min Son against a very poor promoted team? So I feel like I dodged a bullet there. It would have been a self-inflicted bullet. And I want to just be more flexible over the next few weeks with the captaincy. And I'm kind of going to I'm not going to say I'm going to park my auto captain Haaland strategy, because as I mentioned, game week 9, game week 11, I'm pretty sure I'm going to captain. But when it's, game weeks like game week 10, when he's got Manchester United, and maybe in a couple of weeks' time when there's a few other trickier fixtures, I just want to give it a lot more thought than I have been. And I probably will end up falling down on the side of fixtures more so than I have been with the captaincy recently. And it's also a case of, we have a lot of good candidates. You mentioned them there, Saka, Salah, Son. I would even throw Ollie Watkins in there when he's got very good fixtures as a captaincy candidate. For example, Aston Villa game week 10 at home to Luton, and game week 12 at home to Fulham. Those two in particular stand out if you don't want to captain Haaland or someone else. So it's great for FPL that we have a lot of captaincy candidates from week to week now. It makes it more interesting. Obviously, it can make it more painful as well with red arrows if you get it wrong. For example, if you didn't captain Salah last week, chances are you probably didn't have a big green arrow. My red arrow was small, thankfully, but I don't think the red arrows are going to be small for much longer if I go without Salah, because his ownership is just going to keep going up and up with the fixtures and the performances. So Salah is certainly someone I need to think about strongly over the next couple of weeks, whether I want to buy him or whether I want to go without him. But I thought it'd be good to discuss the captaincy this week. I know it's been discussed in a lot of places, but I think it's going to probably be the most important aspect of FPL for the next 3, 4, 5 game weeks.
It used to be the pillar, the cornerstone. It used to be one of the pillars of how you have a green arrow, is make sure you've got those captaincy candidates every week and captain the right one. But make sure you've got all of them anyway, so that if you do captain the wrong one, at least you've covered yourself against, you mitigated against the loss. That used to be how FPL was played back in the before times, before Haaland came along. And as I said last week, I'm actually super excited that it's back. I think that we're going to see a lot more variation in scores. From one week to the next. It can be quite swingy, and I think that FPL is quite fun that way. The red arrows when they happen aren't fun, but the green arrows are great, and the bigger your red arrows, the bigger your greens are going to be. So I just think that there's going to be a lot of swinging around, and I think that's going to be good. And so what we've got on the screen right now is kind of a captaincy matrix for the next 9 game weeks. I do apologise, it doesn't have Watkins on it, but I can sort of add those fixtures in where they're relevant. But we've got Saka. It's probably best to look at it for the next 4, really, because, to keep it a little bit more focused, next 4. Saka's Chelsea at home, Sheffield United away, Newcastle away, and Burnley at home. So Saka's got a great captaincy credentials for 10 and 12. Salah, Everton at home in 9, Forest at home in 10, Luton away in 11, and Brentford at home in 12. So 9, 10, 11. Where he looks quite good. Haaland, Brighton at home, then United away, Bournemouth at home, and then Chelsea away. So really, it's 9 and 11 where it looks best, but 10's not out of the question because he does have a decent record against United. And then Son, really for him, it's game weeks 9 and 12. So Fulham at home in 9, Wolves away in 12, but then it is Crystal Palace and Chelsea away and at home respectively in 10 and 11. And so, just kind of eyeballing it now, you could, in theory, if you owned a selection of these players, maybe captain Haaland for the first of those three, then Saka in game week 10, because Sheffield United at home is a better fixture than Forest at home and Man United away. Game week 11, you could then do Salah, because he's away at Luton. Haaland will be at home against Bournemouth, but Luton have been particularly leaky. And then, of course, Saka's away at Newcastle, so you wouldn't want to captain him there. But then, of those four guys, Saka, Salah, Haaland, and Son, Saka by far and away has the best fixture of game week 12, because you've got Brentford at home for Liverpool, Chelsea away for Man City, and Son's away at Wolves. But actually, by then, you might have sold him to perhaps get to one of these other guys, because the Crystal Palace game and the Chelsea game are not really viable enough when the other three are arguably captaincy options in those game weeks. So that's the kind of loose planning that I've kind of got in my mind for the next four. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if your thoughts on that, but it's just great to have these kinds of decisions back. I've really missed them.
Yeah, do you know what? It's making me excited for the next few weeks, just looking at this fixture ticker. And it's got my juices flowing in terms of my own team as well, because I've got Haaland and I've got Son, but I don't have Salah. And I recently sold Bukayo Saka as well. So I've got a plan of getting Saka back in game week 10, because it's a lot easier to get Saka back than it is to get Mohamed Salah in. And that's probably just going to push the wild card to a late wild card. Now, I am keeping an open mind to, there's a small chance I play a game week 10 wild card. But if I don't play it in game week 10, I think it's going to be much, much later then. I think this is my last probably opportunity to play it before just committing to a longer term strategy. So looking at this next 4 game weeks for captaincy, Haaland 9 and 11. If I bring Saka in game week 10, I can captain him in game week 10 and 12. So straight away, that's telling me I don't need to break the bank, rip up the team to get Salah when I've got 2 very, very good captaincy candidates for the next 4 game weeks. So again, that's pushed me towards not wildcarding in 10 and not ripping up my team to get Salah, because when I've got players like Watkins and Alvarez and Trippier and cash spread around the squad, I've got the double Tottenham midfield. We can't have every player, and I fully expect Salah to do extremely well over the next few weeks. And I'm in the same boat the Haaland sellers were in. You're just backing your team to match the Haaland teams or slightly better them. And I'm doing the same. I'm going to back my team to match the Salah teams or, hopefully better them. And it's very interesting. It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. And something else got me thinking there was that looking at Tottenham for the next 4 weeks, when you look at some of the others, Haaland, Saka and Salah, unlikely to captain Heung-min Son, I think, in the near future. So I was kind of thinking Bruno Fernandes to Saka in game week 10. But I think I've got to entertain the possibility of doing Heung-min Son to Saka in 10 instead, and just going with one Tottenham midfielder in Maddison. And obviously selling Son instead of Bruno would free up more cash for other moves. And then if I end up keeping Bruno, I don't really want Bruno for game week 10 against Manchester City, but if I can hold him through that, and if I sell Son instead, Bruno then goes into Fulham, Luton at home in game week 12, which is arguably a captaincy game for Bruno Fernandes. Not that I think anyone will do that with the other options, but it's Fulham, Luton, Everton in a run of 3 games. And I know Everton's not as easy as it has been in the past, but it's one of those where I've had Bruno from game week 1. I sold Rashford recently. I've always been planning to get rid of Bruno as well, but he might actually survive, and it might actually be Heung-min Son who goes. So I'll just obviously monitor those 2 players closely in game week 9, and then make that decision in game week 10 who goes for Saka.
Yeah, it's very similar to what I'm thinking, to be honest, in terms of with Son, because the game weeks 10 and 11 just look really tricky for Spurs, because and I think they're deceptively tricky. I think they've been playing so well that people will look at that and think, oh yeah, I'm fine there, because Chelsea have had a bad start to the season and Crystal Palace are Crystal Palace, right? Well, in the last 4 matches, Crystal Palace have had 3 clean sheets, Chelsea have had 2. In that time, only Newcastle have conceded fewer big chances than Chelsea. Their attack doing so poorly has masked the fact that the defence has actually been doing quite well. And so those 2 fixtures in particular, they're really not favourable fixtures at all. And with the money that's available for him that can potentially get me back to Saka, who arguably is the best captain option for 10 and 12, just seems the right thing to do. And it's another reason why I want to roll transfers in game week 9, so I can, I can downgrade from Son to Saka, no problem. But Yeah, I just want to be able to assess it all properly. So yeah, I'm in a similar boat there with that kind of decision and sort of making transfers around the captaincy, because that's the best way to chase some upside. If you can get those captaincy calls right and base your transfers around them, theoretically you're going to do okay. And also just touching on something you mentioned there about what you go without when you don't have Salah. Sorry, what you go without if you do have Salah, what you go with if you don't have Salah. We talked about that last week in a bit more detail, actually, in terms of a no Salah team versus a no Trippier team. And for helpfully enough, I'm the no Trippier team. Mark is the no Salah team, and so we're sort of very much different sides of the same coin there. And it's been interesting to compare how our seasons have gone in the last few weeks, because so far we've kind of matched each other. We're both fairly happy with how we've got on in the last few weeks. You know, we're only about 150k places apart, which right now is nothing. So, you know, there's more to it than that, of course, but. One thing I just wanted to add is that there are a lot of people out there, we've seen them in the community, kind of overly stressing about which side of the coin they settle on. And I guess my message to those people is just try not to get too stressed by that, because theoretically it might be okay. You might end up in the same place as someone who went the other way, and you might spare yourself a little bit of anxiety about it, if that makes sense. So yeah, there's always that possibility, isn't there, that it kind of works out.
Just to echo what you said is do not stress over this. You know, it's there's quite a few viable routes. You know, the Salah teams look great. I think the no Salah teams look great, and you can say the same about Haaland now as well. So you know, some people have both and they make the compromises elsewhere. But if the two big boys do well, and you know, players like Anthony Gordon and these guys can deliver, and some of the cheaper defenders, you could come out on top of everyone. So it's, like I said last week, I think it's shaping up to be a very good FPL season, which is what we needed after a difficult couple of years. And yeah, I'm really intrigued to see how it plays out over the next few weeks, and whether I fall on the right side or the wrong side, or I just fall kind of similar to what everyone falls on. I'm not overly bothered, because we're trying to predict an unpredictable game here. We do our best, and most important is do what's best for your team. I feel like going no Salah is viable for my team, whereas you might have a much easier route to get him, and you might think you really want to captain him more times than I do. And then I think if you watch a lot of FPL content, if you listen to a lot of FPL content, I listen to a lot of FPL podcasts. I probably listen to an FPL podcast at least once a day, which is arguably too much, but I'm very good at listening and not kind of hanging on to certain ideas from other people. I still go away and make my own decisions on a Friday. So that's the key advice here. Take in the content, but make sure the decision is yours, and make sure it feels right for your squad. There will be FOMO, there will be fear of missing out every week this season. You know, I've had it with Son in certain weeks. I've had it with Sterling. I have it with Salah now. You've just got to stay strong and stick to your guns, stick to your strategy. And like I said, it could all just shake out pretty similarly anyway, and all the stress will have been a complete waste of time.
That is the hope. That is the hope, that the stress was all for naught, for sure. But speaking of decisions being right for your team, there is one roughly 6-month-old little boy who has decided to go without Haaland and Salah. So, Mark, tell us how the mini general is getting on at the moment. How's his team looking for Gameweek 9?
The mini general, I like that. I've been calling him General Junior, but I like the mini general as well. Yeah. So yeah, Sunny Soldiers reflected on the first 8 game weeks of the season. You know, 7 months old now. We sat down, we had a really long, detailed chat. You know, during the break, we looked at the stats, we looked at a few options, and it hasn't been a good 8 weeks. He's got one victory over me, and I guess that probably is all he was really looking for. You know, when he can't pick players like Haaland and Salah and Trippier's, they don't fit into the criteria. To get one victory in 8, if you can average that over the season, I think that's probably pretty decent. So you've got the team on the screen, have you?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got the bus team there. There's a number of flags now, unfortunately. We talked about Robertson earlier on. Sonny's going to have to shoulder the responsibility for making a decision there, that's for sure.
Yeah, so a couple of issues. Robertson is an issue. Obviously, if he's out for a few weeks, he'll probably be the transfer out of this team. The issue is there's not too many options in terms of defenders to replace with, but it'll be sticking to the plan. Captain and Son every game week. Good fixture this week against Fulham. So, you know, the weeks where Sonny's going to beat me is when my captain doesn't do well and Heung-min Son does deliver. I think that was the week where he beat me on that one occasion. Up front, the fixtures don't look great for this team either. You've got Ferguson, you've got Solly March. People might be wondering why he's there, but Sonny was born in March, so I just made an exception to the rule there that Solly March could be included. So Sonny's going to be a Brighton fan against Manchester City. He's going to be hoping Haaland blanks for me, and Solly March and Evan Ferguson do the business. You know what's funny? I watched the Greece Ireland game the Friday night. Then Ireland played Gibraltar. I think it was last night or 2 nights ago. Won 4-0. And I think I need to double check it, but almost every player had Son at the end. Ferguson scored, I think Robinson scored. There was definitely another Son who's on the score sheet as well. I think Doherty was the exception to the rule, but even during the international break, the Son teams have been scoring well. So yeah, Jackson's flagged as well, but hopefully he'll be fine. So again, we'll look at this. We'll go into the next batch of 8 game weeks and see if he can improve on his one victory over the first few weeks.
Well, it is quite literally baby steps for him as he learns how to beat you in FPL, taking one game week at a time. One victory in the first 8. That seems like a good ratio for a parent who's teaching their child how to win, but also how to learn how to lose as well, because there is going to be a lot of that before he can take on Daddy and really give him a run for his money.
Exactly. So yeah, we'll keep we'll check in from time to time. We'll certainly check in on the weeks where he beats me, and hopefully that won't be for a while.
Well, from an editorial perspective, I kind of hope it's every week, because then we've got some great entertaining content. But we also need you to have a good season so that people keep watching. So it's a constant. What do we need? What do we want? We just want entertainment and insight in equal measure. But let's move back onto the insight for one final order then. And it, of course, is relating to our transfers. We've kind of already alluded to it quite a bit. But going into Game Week 9, what are you advising people to try and do, if possible, with their transfers?
Yeah, I think it's always fairly sensible after an international break, if you can, roll a transfer for Game Week 10 if possible. If your team is in good shape, which I think most teams are this week because the fixtures are so good, if you've been lucky and you don't have too many flags, if you can get by to Game Week 10 with 2 free transfers, I think it could be very valuable. And I think the reasons why it could be very valuable is there's a lot of... The fixtures are good in Game Week 9, but there's a lot of very tasty fixtures in Game Week 10 as well for players that we might want longer term. So Aston Villa, for example, in Game Week 10 are at home to Luton Town. So Watkins, Diaby and Matty Cash are really good options. Arsenal Game Week 10, we mentioned Saka against Sheffield United, but you might want to buy an Odegaard or a Martinelli. Who knows? Gabriel Jesus might even be an option then. And the Arsenal defence is obviously very attractive for Sheffield United as well. Salah, if you don't have him, Nottingham Forest at home in Game Week 10. Jared Bowen's at home to Everton. And Matoma is at home to Fulham. So there's a lot of very tasty transfer targets with good fixtures in Game Week 10. So, rather than having one free transfer and buying one of them, you might want to have 2 free transfers to get 2 of them, or do a bit of surgery to get a Salah, for example. So that's in the back of my mind as well. I could wildcard in Game Week 10 to get Salah, but I could also have 2 free transfers in Game Week 10, maybe take a -4 on top of that and be able to get Salah that way also and still be able to keep the wildcard. So, yeah. Rolling a transfer into Game Week 10, if possible, is order number 3.
Yeah, and to be honest, it's something that we love doing. I mean, it probably comes as no surprise to people that on this video we're both like, yeah, do it, because it unlocks so much. And to be honest, sometimes... Well, it's well documented the impact you can have on your team the following week if you roll. But sometimes holding off on selling someone is what ends up giving you rewards. I mean, I got a little bit lucky a couple of weeks ago when I felt the team could do with some work, but might be okay if it didn't. Because I didn't make a transfer, Botman not playing, and I got 15 points off my bench from Anderson. So sometimes you kind of make your own luck, or a better example is probably like an Mbeumo. People might think, oh, he's been playing really badly. He hasn't been getting the points, blah, blah, blah. I have to move him now. Well, you don't have to, because he's got a good fixture. And so therefore the act of rolling might kind of put you at an advantage for 2 weeks, because you hold on to the guy that people have sold. He gets the return. And then you sell him for the next one. Matoma seems like an easy switch, for example, or a Ward-Prowse or a Bowen. So it can even have an impact on this week. I find that the weeks when I go in and I'm a bit nervous that my team's not ready, I always overperform. And the weeks when I go in and think, whoa, I've made some great transfers this week, it's looking really good, are the weeks when it underwhelms. So I don't know if that's just, a random coincidence, but, there's probably some logic to it in there somewhere.
Yeah, and I think we mentioned it last week about low expectations. Some weeks you've got to just go in with low expectations. Maybe we should do that every week, to be fair, if we want to mentally manage this game well. But I always feel like if I'm rolling a transfer, I do go in with low expectations because I know a lot of people are maybe bringing in a good target that might perform well. But I'm confident then with the extra week of info, bit more flexibility, maybe 2 or 3 new players coming in the week after that you can make up that and more afterwards. So yeah, I was going to mention him, Bimo, if you didn't. Perfect example. I would always roll a transfer in that scenario rather than selling them Bumo because fixture, good underlying numbers, penalty taker, and then someone like Matoma is an easy switch the week after. So yeah, like I said earlier, I hope Bumo blanks.
Incredible. Well, I mean, just look, going back to that little comparison, I mean, just Matoma is a great option from Game Week 10, but he's not really a good option for Game Week 9. That's the thing. It's like, that's the timing. That's the way you've got to. That's the way around you've got to do it. West Ham arguably the same. Aston Villa away, it's not an amazing fixture because Villa have been playing really well, but Everton at home really is. So there's
Just
not
on
too
that as
many
well,
opportunities.
another really good example of the kind of short-term transfers. I could do Bruno to Saka this week, but Bruno's got Sheffield United this week and Man City the week after, whereas Saka's got Chelsea this week and then Sheffield United the week after. So it perfectly syncs up. I get both players for Sheffield United rather than having them for Chelsea and Manchester City. So this happens all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing is that you just look at the Game Week 9 fixtures and there's not that many short-term gains to be made. And there's much bigger, longer-term gains to be made from Game Week 10 onwards, which can probably, if you get the transfers right, help you put that wild card off even more, which very much is what we're trying to aim for this season, both of us, actually. We still got it. So, yeah, anything we can do to achieve that, it's worth doing. So, yeah. One thing we haven't mentioned actually already in the show is, of course, if you haven't signed up for your Fantasy Football Scout membership, then make sure you do that because we've been talking about a lot of stuff to do with the season ticker, and we're actually both sat here looking at it, and it's helping us kind of talk through what we want to do. If you want access to that yourself and you can play around with it, it's one of the members area. Time is running out for you to get that 30% off on the preseason prices, so make sure you do that ahead of Game Week 9. Also, if you've enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel and hit that bell notification. Some great ways to support the channel that are completely free and make a big difference for us, but also are going to help you guys out to make sure that you don't miss any content. We've mentioned, of course, that we had an episode last week, and not much has changed too much since we did that. So if you have a bit of spare time, go back and watch last week's episode where we talked about no Salah versus no Trippier. I think that was helpful for a lot of people. And of course, now that we're into the second week of the international break, all of the usual shows are back into their usual formats and slots. So there's burning questions, goals imminent, deadline dilemmas, all coming up this week. So make sure you check those out. That's everything I need to add, Mark, unless there's anything you'd like to issue the troops with before we go.
No, last piece of information is always just best of luck for Game Week 9. I hope the troops serve you well, and we'll talk to you all again next week.
Incredible stuff. Well, with that, we shall leave you fine folks to enjoy the rest of your international break and plan for Game Week 9, and we shall see you next time. Goodbye.